everybody's very precious about their work. And I think the creative process is not precious.
That was Jim Capobianco, an amazing director, screenwriter, and animator who worked on such movies like Ratatouille and The Lion King. Jim went from working at a giant studio like Pixar to creating The Inventor, an indie stop-motion film about Leonardo da Vinci. This interview is packed with experiences that will make you a better storyteller. So get ready to take notes and enjoy the interview. Hello, Jim, and welcome to Write for Animation. It's so great to have you here.
Oh, it's wonderful to be here, Pietro. Thank you.
So let's start with, how did you get into storytelling?
Well, I got into animation. I just wanted to do animation. That's what I thought you did. You were an animator. And when I got to Cal Arts, California Institute of the Arts, I had a great story teacher named Joe Ramp, probably one of the best, greatest story men to be in the industry. And he showed me that there is this other area to go into other than animation, which is story and story development, reboarding. And I thought, wow, that's where I want to go. That's where the spark of the whole process starts. And then beyond that, I had a roommate who was in the live action. So I would go into his classes too. And I had a great teacher there, Alexander McKendrick, and he had a class called Dramatic Structure. And I started learning about live action film as well. And I started to think about animation storytelling and how it's a very narrow band of story inside of, especially the Hollywood system. So from that, I went, we could tell more stories in animation. I think you could do different things. So I thought maybe that's what I could do. Maybe I can have an impact that way. It seemed really exciting to me to do that. And then Brad Bird showed up and gave a lecture at our class. And he basically reiterated the same thing I was just thinking. And I just thought, okay, now here's this veteran in the business telling me the exact same thing I'm thinking. I'm like, okay, I want to do this. So that's what got me into story. And then I ended up focusing just on storyboarding. And then my first job was on The Lion King.
At Write for Animation, we are all about the writing process, but in animation, it extends to story and beyond. So when you have an idea, what do you focus on when you start a new script?
I start visualizing it more. I mean, you were mentioning the writing process and story as two separate things in a way, but they're not. I mean, in story, I mean drawing, storyboards. To me, in the animation feature film business, storyboarding and writing are exactly the same thing. It's just you're doing it in a visual way. In developing a film, the old Disney films back in Walt's days were all storyboarded. They weren't scripted. So they were developed that way. So that's the way I approach it. I start thinking in visual terms and it starts to get me excited. And then I'll start writing it because it is more immediate. And that's the language of filmmaking or Hollywood today. And so I'll start writing and get through a draft really fast. I usually try to treatment, a very detailed treatment. They're usually like 25, 30 pages. But that allows me to be looser. I don't have to worry about the format of scripts. And all this time, I'm also doodling and thinking visually and stuff. And then once I feel the treatment feels right, I'll start writing a script. And then I try to get it down really fast. So it's just terrible. It's like the worst thing to read, but I need to get it out. Sandy McKendrick would say this. He would always say, script isn't written, it's rewritten, 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 rewritten. And it's the same true with storyboarding too. So that's kind of my process,
Yeah, so writing is rewriting. What is your rewriting process for you between both animatic, story, and written word on the page?
Well, I don't get feedback right away. I think I have to get to a point where I feel like it's necessary to get feedback. So I will just go back in and reread it and rework it and go, okay. I mean, when I blast through it, sometimes I miss stuff. Like if I don't know something, but I know something later on, but I'm not really sure how they'll connect, I just write it down because sometimes you can get stuck in the middle or other areas where you don't quite know how will this work, but it feels like it should work. But I find by just writing and doing the work and then rewriting, stuff comes to you. It starts flowing out, or I'll get away from it all and I'll walk. I'll think I'll leave it for a week or so. Maybe something will inspire me and think, oh wait, that's like that idea. Oh, maybe I could do that, put that in. So and that's part of the rewriting process too. It's just sort of an evolutionary process. But yeah, so me, it's just an iterative process. It's a long kind of wading through the swamps, pushing through the jungle to find the answers.
So you start like putting together some art, and at some point a question starts to raise, which is, what is the right medium for this project? We're thinking about, let's say, Pinocchio. It's the story of a puppet, but it's also created with a puppet, like with a stop motion puppet. And so
It makes perfect sense. Can you share some guidelines for somebody with an idea still thinking about what is the right technique to use for this project?
Well, I think there's two different things going on there. One is to get your story down and just get it written. And I think not to worry too much about the way you'll actually do it. But having said that, I do think it is helpful as you go in through the process. It may start telling you, oh, I think this feels like a stop motion film, or this feels like it could be done in a computer way. I mean, you might start your process thinking in those terms and write to those strengths of those art forms. But I don't think you should ever let anything inhibit you while you're writing a story. It's about the doing of it. You need to get it out and just put it out there. Everybody's very precious about their work. And I think the creative process is not precious. It needs to be like you're rolling up your sleeves and you're diving in there and you're really trying to make this thing come out of your brain onto a page or into the world. And it's a messy process. And there's going to be imperfections in it. And that's what's beautiful. So don't worry about it. It's more about just the doing. So don't get hung up on like, what medium am I going to make this in, or what should it be?
We're seeing in the industry a lot more mix and blend of genres. And the Inventor makes many stop motion, but with some beautiful 2D elements. What was the decision behind this choice of techniques?
It was mainly because of subject matter, because about Leonardo da Vinci. Well, subject matter and selling the film. So I didn't really want to do it as a CG film, but I thought of it, it's about Leonardo da Vinci. Well, what about stop motion? Because it's also kind of Da Vinci-like, where you build things. And you have to deal with reality and kind of mathematics in the sense of like gravity and physics and things. There's a lot of fabrication and invention. So I thought, well, what if we did in stop motion? That'd be cool. I have no idea how to make one, but that would be neat. And then of course the drawing, I was like, well, I gotta have to 2D in it. And obviously his sketches speak to that. So I could handle the 2D a little bit more like I did in the short. And the real world could be the stop motion world, and the flights of fancy, his imagination, talking about his drawing. And it also became an economic thing because you could build a couple of the inventions, but not everything. So if you could animate it in drawing, that would be a cheaper way to go. You could use it throughout the film to bridge gaps where if you had to do it all in stop motion. Like in the movie, there's a moment where we use these maps. And originally I wanted to do them as like built maps with little figurines moving along, like even have a magnet under it and have them move. I thought it'd be really charming and cool. But as the production was developing, it was like, okay, there's going to be a whole other expense. We'd have to maybe even hire another studio to just do these bits. And that was like, okay, well, let's do them in 2D. And the 2D guys did a great little job with it. I kind of knew this would be an independent film, probably. So I was thinking in terms of like, well, what economically, how would you make this? Like, what's the process of making these things? So you can think in those terms too.
What was the hardest story element to solve, and what have you learned from the process of solving it?
The most difficult thing was figuring out what his goal would be in the film, because the story is about Leonardo when he moves to France. I know you're Italian. Actually found a lot of Italians don't really want to believe that he ever moved to France. So
oh, really?
They were trying to sell the film. They were like, what? No, he never moved to France.
Oh, really? Historically?
Yeah.
Deniers.
Yeah. So it's about this time. And I was like, in a story, you need a goal for your character. You need like, well, what are they after? And I was like, well, what is he after? He's like, went to France, but what is he after? Trying to help the king with a problem, but that's not his problem. What's his problem? Your main character has to have a goal for them, that they're going to have an external goal, they have an internal goal, and a philosophical goal. What is the external goal? What's he trying to do? What is his philosophical goal? So like figuring out all those for him was really important. And then when I did my research, I knew I'd be doing this thing where he studied anatomy and the body, and like, what would that mean? And how would I show it? Because I didn't want to show him like some stop motion, you can imagine like he's ripping out intestines and it's gross and macabre and stuff. I didn't want to do that. I really don't like that stuff. So I wanted it to be charming and poetic and interesting. So I had this idea that he'd go on these journeys through his studies. And so that's where that started. But I'm like, where is he journeying to? Why is he doing this journey? So in my research, I learned that at the time period in the Renaissance, there was a belief that the soul was inside of people and you could find it. And he was on a search for finding it. So I didn't make that up in the movie. I It's really,
Yeah, it's beautiful.
that to me went, well, that's an interesting goal. He's at the end of his life, and so he's asking, what's the meaning of it all? Like, what's this all about? And he was trying to really do that. The real Da Vinci, he was really trying, like Einstein, trying to find the theory of everything. Like, how is it all interconnected? So that I thought was really good. And that gave me this like target I could go for. In a way, the soul became the MacGuffin of the movie. And it evolved from there. And this led to like the theme of the whole film, in the sense that it's about legacy and what you leave behind and how your actions affect other people. And then that gave me so much more material.
And then you find these gems from research. I think that it seems like they were meant to be in the film from the beginning, but you need to keep wondering.
Research is really important. I don't think I don't know if people respect it enough to really do the work. You really need to dig in there. I learned that from Pixar. We would do a lot of research in the story department. Even on Lion King, I would research fairy tales and folk tales from Africa and see what I could glean from that. And in that, I discovered that they have the belief that their ancestors are in the stars. And then I developed that sequence right before Mufasa's in the stampede. And I was just a junior assistant story person. And I was like, well, hey, I have this idea based on this. And then the directors loved it. And they thought, oh, this like closes a loop we had a problem. So area research is huge, and as much as you can, even during the process of writing. It's not like each thing you're like, okay, I got the treatment done. Next is there's a fluidity to it, and you keep researching, keep your ears open, listen to what people are talking about. What do you see on TV that inspires you, or read, or anything that like kind of can, once you're in this moment of this story and thinking in these process, then your radar kind of goes up and you start picking up other things.
Can you recall any other like story gem that came from research?
Yeah, for sure. So when we were making Your Friend the Rat, we did so much research on rats and chefs and France and Paris. And one aspect we didn't use a lot was the research in rats. I found it really fascinating how they live and how they've actually been with people from the beginning of our history. And so I created a short called Your Friend the Rat. And that all came out of the research and funny things I found about, or interesting things I found between the two. And that all evolved from like all that exploration that birthed the whole short film. And the research that went into the Inventor too, like there's so much stuff in there that comes from just really diving into different things. And like there's a whole thing with Henry VIII, and he comes to the kingdom and he brings his own castle. And that's actually true. He really did do that, and it's silly. It's really ridiculous. He actually came 10 years after Leonardo was there and had already passed away. But I thought it was such a fun, and I needed that element of these kings, and then to add that in, I thought it was neat. So that came out of the research. So like things could be gags, they could be moments that impact the movie in a big way. It could be character elements. I mean, the research led to Marguerite in the film, learning about the court and like, okay, what is this court like of Francis I? And I learned that there's a sister, Marguerite, and I learned that she is considered a Renaissance woman of the time. And she studied art and wrote her own books. People loved her. And I thought, well, maybe Leonardo had a bigger impact on her than on Francis. But the idea that he would come there and inspire his sister, who would then also inspire Leonardo, because her whole thing is she's very pragmatic. And she believes in these things, but she also believes in doing things, like getting things done. So she teaches that to him. So they complement each other in that way and support each other. So that research led to her. So it's just, I can't like recommend it enough.
Something that I also loved is you balance these deep themes with some comedic moments. Can you tell us a little bit how these two elements of drama and comedy relate?
Well, for me, a lot of it's a personal, I love comedy. So I really want to enjoy the film as I'm watching it. And I think comedy is really hard because it's all about the timing, and you could write something funny and you could think it's funny, but how it's delivered, how it's created, how it moves time in the making of the film can hurt it or help it. It's like the King Henry VIII in the castle. To me, it's silly. Right, this guy would bring his own castle to a castle. Yeah. So finding those little moments, I'm like, okay, that's funny. How do I work that into the narrative? If it didn't, took away, then it would go. And I think a film has a language. If you had a dramatic film and all of a sudden there's a bunch of comedy later on, people would be like, wait, I thought this was a murder mystery story without humor. Or the other way around. Well, it was really funny, and now it turned really serious and boring. So maybe the story starts telling you. I mean, when Stanley Kubrick was writing Dr. Strangelove, he originally started out to make a serious film about the atom bomb. And then as he's developing and researching, he realized how ridiculous the whole situation was. He's like, wait, this is really a comedy. And then he turned it all over into a comedy. So,
which was brilliant. Yeah, satire, and it cuts deeper than a serious film.
I find with that, it becomes more accessible to people. You can kind of cover more ground with humor in that sense, not push people away like if it's too gross or dramatic.
I love like everything you're sharing, and I know the entire production was all supported by these mentorships and master classes. How important was sharing with others? I know you've been mentored by Bernie Madison like back in the days, but we also chatted with Tom Moore. He mentioned that he at some point came to chat about the story, and it seems to me that you love sharing, but also to surround yourself with other people that can give you more input.
Well, yeah, I don't think we're all an island, and I think bringing in other people, especially mentors, or when you run into people who have a lot of experience, think bigger than you, think differently than you, to bring them in and pick their brains and learn. And so I try to give back too. I've been doing this a while, and I want people to tell good stories. I don't want them to tell bad stuff, because I want to go see their movies. I want to read their books and stuff. So I want to help them and go, and I don't have all the answers. I don't know. Like I said, I'm still trying to learn about comedy. What I do know, I'd like to pass on. And in a way, that's the film is about that. It's about what you pass on to others and how you help pass on your knowledge. I mean, Leonardo da Vinci, in a way, is this fountain of knowledge and thinking, and he keeps passing it down to us, inspiring us and stuff. So I feel like that's the same in each of us, that we should inspire each other and pass on what we know to others. I think this quote, it was attributed to Abraham Lincoln. I don't know if that's exactly right, but it was, you can't be a hero to everyone, but you can be a hero to someone. I like that. And if you can't be a teacher to everyone, but you can be a teacher to someone, I think you could change that word too.
Well, you're doing it now for Right for Animation. This is what we are all about. We want to share story knowledge and experience so that people get more, they get encouraged then. And so thank you for doing that.
This was an interesting surprise, because I was looking at the back end of our YouTube channel and discovered that 74% of the recurring viewers are not subscribed. And so I have a big favor to ask to you. It's actually a small favor, just a click on the subscribe button now, and in exchange for that small favor, we'll improve our videos and make more and more free content for you. Subscribe now, and let's make this journey even more amazing together. Thank you so much. Back to Jim.
So going back, like now that we're in talking about teaching, you mentioned something that is super important, the internal stake and the philosophical stake and the external goal. Can you tell us a little bit in how does that work in a story and connected to the protagonist's journey?
Okay, so here's one of the things I struggle with a lot with. I've been thinking about a lot, books about story and all these things. Because they always have like plot point 1 lands here, plot point 2 here. It's like a very like rigid system. The same has been true now of the goals. So yes, there are these 3 ideas of the 3 goals, and I did mention them earlier. But I also want to say, again, it's a process. And in a way, everybody gets hung up on like, oh, wait, do I have all these checked? And I think that hangs up people too much. And I feel like you need to, again, let the piece speak to you. And eventually you may discover, oh, wait a minute, this is linking up. And maybe it's a natural progression. And I think that's what's beautiful about creating these, is like this relationship you have with your art and your material that starts to talk back to you, and you talk with it and you're having a dialogue. But let's go back to what it is. So the external goal is like a thing like, I'm going to go blow up the Death Star. That's an external goal. So the internal goal for Luke is, I want to be a Jedi Knight like my father. Like, I am going to go do that. And that's really a personal thing for him to do. And then the philosophical goal is kind of in a way the goal over the whole movie. Luke will carry on this concept of the Force and friendship and how it all kind of comes together. So in a way, that's a philosophical sense of the whole thing. In Star Wars, they all come together at the same kind of moment. I don't know if that's I don't think it's always going to happen, and that's okay, because that's one of the things where people get hung up on. They'll be like, oh no, they all have to meet at the same time. What I should just mention is, everybody's like, it's a specific thing, and in a way it can be, but I actually think it's like a sort of an area in the film. If you look at Ratatouille, which is a really interesting example, is the plot point when he makes the soup, but it can only be when he makes the soup. He decides, it's always a choice. He decides to not go out the window like a rat and run away. He decides to stay and fix this thing, right? It's just dangerous. But it can't just be that. It actually needs to be, and he needs to be discussed as a human. So the second one is meeting There's the Linguini moment under the bridge. And it's one whole plot point. It's the same one. You need the both of them. But they don't happen at the same time. It's like having close to each other, but not the same moment. And there's a decision moment again there. Remy starts to run away from Linguini, but then he stops and he thinks, wait a minute, this is my chance. So he needed both of these things to add up so that he could do it. So to me, that started making me think that we all get locked in like, oh, it happens on this page. It's this one thing event. And I don't think that's necessarily always going to be the thing. So again, that's why I say, don't get hung up on all these rules. In a way, you have to work on your film and let it speak to you. And eventually it'll start telling you, and you'll start realizing, oh, well, maybe this is, or maybe I do have this moment a little too late and bring it back a little bit, but it could be this more, not as concrete a thing.
Yeah, it becomes too formulaic or paint by the number, or
Right.
because you can check all the marks and that there's a story without a soul. At the same time, it gives us like a little bit of a common language. Now that you mentioned Ratatouille, and we have a question from one of our Write for Animation Academy members, Shailene. She asked, I especially love the nuances of Remy and Ego. Can you tell us any fun or interesting facts about the development of these and how his growth supports some of the themes of the movie?
Well, like I said earlier, you really need that character that's the antithesis of what the main character's after, right? So if you look at it in a global way, Remy is a cook, chef, and the biggest antagonist to a chef is a critic. So in the simplest terms, you have that friction. Also, Remy is about bringing life to people in a sense. He's like really about feed people and he brings life and nourishes them and stuff. Whereas Ego is about sucking the life out of things. Even is brilliantly designed by Brad and his team as they evolve the story even further. The coffin-like room and visually storytelling his character through the whole space, which I think is really important for people to remember. It's not only about the acting of the character, it's also about their design. It's about the environment, the lighting, the place, everything. As a writer, it's hard to write those things. You can't really, but as much as you can sort of indicates direction of character with the moments and the scene and everything. Like everything needs to point to the characters, how they're going to move towards that goal. They're either going to point to pushing against character or moving them forward. So with Ego, it kind of evolved that way. He became this sort of the embodiment of the philosophical of Remy in a way, because its goal is to save the restaurant and to become a cook. I mean, his personal goal is to become the chef he wants to be. The external goal is to save the restaurant and to save it from Ego.
Remy brings life to him with the flashback and the moment of...
Now, the interesting about that flashback, when we developed it originally, it was Gusto who had that flashback. So originally, the original version, Gusto was the one Remy was trying to revitalize him from the great chef he once was. He was kind of like a sellout. Everything Skinner does in the current movie, that's what Gusto was trying to do. And in that moment when Gusto, because we learned this about chefs, I got the research, here we go. When you learn about chefs, the thing they always long for, even though they get really big, is to have that food that their moms made for them, or that home cooking. There are things they love is let's just make some food together. And so that became a great moment. We were like, oh, that's a great turning moment based on everything we've been developing. So yeah, and the idea was suggested by Enrico Casaros because he was watching Shell and soccer, and there was some kind of moment where you flash back into somebody's past, and he pitched that idea, and I was like, oh, I love that. That is great. And so I pitched it to the first director, and he was like, all right, let's do it. And then he embraced it. And then we had Ronnie Del Carmen storyboarded it, and anything Ronnie Del Carmen storyboard becomes cinematic, historic magic. So he did that. And then as the film evolved, and then Brad came in and he's like, okay, I like all this, but I need to bring it in. And he killed off Gusto and then made him a ghost, and then put the focus more with Remy against Ego in a sense. And so Ego, because Gusto's dead, Ego needed to be the one who would have the flashback. It obviously works brilliantly.
It's a beautiful moment. It shows that you cannot plan everything, and you discover as you move along. So
You do, and you rely on other people. I think a lot of people get hung up on the sense, I got to come up with everything. And I think that's really detrimental to creativity.
it happens to young writers because, first of all, we get the scripts that has been polished, the for your consideration version that it looks exactly like the film. You're watching a film that has gone through so many steps, and so it's sometimes discouraging. That's something we observe in the community. Can you share a little bit of encouragement to people that I love that you do your almost vomit draft at the beginning, like that. This is normal. That this is all the big films that we see. They start in a place that it's rougher.
Yeah, that's true. Well, I don't know. That's the way I work. I don't want to say how other people do it. I assume a lot of other people are doing it that way. To me, again, I think it's about not being precious. Like you said, the vomit drop, get it out. I think it's the doing. Really, it's you need to start writing and then it becomes concrete. Because you're writing it, it becomes maybe a mushy clay or solidified, but it's starting to form into something, and you may have to re-chisel it, you may need to pour different concrete, you may need to keep running with this metaphor, but you have to start somewhere and you need to start building on it. And I think the best way is just to start. Once I start to draw, it starts to tell me in a different way, and I go, oh wait, what if this character wasn't a really tall character and it was actually really short because I just did this drawing of him short or something. And I'm like, okay, wait, if he's a short character, he can't do X, Y, and Z in the script, or he's going to be thought of a different way. And so it feeds back into the writing, and it could be little different changes. And so it's just what excites you.
You still feel blocked every now and then, like unable to sit down and write, or you just do it anyway?
Oh yeah, I mean, of course. That's why I said if I don't know something, I just ignore it and I go on to the next thing that I kind of know. And that way I keep going back. And if I have a block where I'm not quite sure, and I do this a lot, I'll like start a story, I'll get excited. I really think it's cool, but there's kind of once you kind of get deep into the second act, I'm like, I don't really know the answer yet. So I kind of got, like I said earlier, my radar up that kind of like, okay, what is this? And I'll keep like returning to these things and I go, whoa, let me work on it some more. And I start thinking about it and then, oh wait, no, and it happens. Or I'll go back in a writer, I'll reread what I wrote, and that sometimes triggers stuff. And I think that's really good. Now, some people say don't reread, get it all down. But if you're really stuck, then maybe go back and reread what you have. And it'll do this thing again where you like start thinking about it again.
Because I don't recall the exact quote, but it's like inspiration comes when you're working.
Yeah, that's the same thing. Yeah, that's exactly what I'm talking about. So.
Well, thank you so much, Jim. This has been wonderful.
That was amazing. Now, keep learning from the industry top talent by clicking on this playlist that I put together for you. I'm Pietro, this is Write for Animation, and I'll see you in the playlist.